RFK Racing is expected to sign Ryan Preece? How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. Lots to get to today in a few minutes. Greg Mathern from Win the Race will stop by. We'll talk Atlanta Motor Speedway by the numbers. This episode is also sponsored by Toxic Waste and their all-new Slime Liquor 2.0. More about them in a few minutes as well. But let's begin with some breaking news. Yesterday, The Athletic reports that RFK Racing is expected to expand to 3 full-time NASCAR Cup Series teams in 2025. Jordan Bianchi writes that the team is expected to land Kroger as a major sponsor and is expected to sign driver Ryan Preece. Big news. Reports of Kroger moving to RFK surfaced a few weeks ago. I think even Adam Stern first mentioned Ryan Preece as a potential candidate, but this sounds way more definitive. Fox reporter Bob Pockrass asked RFK team owner Brad Keselowski about this news yesterday, and Brad laughed and said, quote, "Coming soon, everything is in the realm of possibility." One final detail, The Athletic notes that RFK will either buy or lease a charter, and an official announcement is expected in the next few weeks. There are a few different ways to approach this. Let's start here, get this out of the way. How does this news impact JTG Doherty Racing, who recently extended driver Ricky Stenhouse Jr., but have relied heavily on full season sponsorship from Kroger for many years? Bob Pockrass tweeted this today, Preece, Kroger, strong relationship, but then JTG has been preparing for Kroger possibly leaving, so this shouldn't impact its 2025 plans. That is good to know. Hopefully the 47 team is able to piece together enough sponsorship that they can get back to how competitive they were in 2023 when they won the Daytona 500 and ran inside the top 16 in points most of the regular season. But now that that's out of the way, let's focus on RFK Racing. Brad Keselowski has been extremely open about his desire to expand to 3 full-time teams. Shoot, I remember this article from back in January. Keselowski said, yeah, we want a 3rd full-time Cup car. Shoot, we also want to go to IMSA. They've dabbled, of course, with Stage 60 part-time, but now with 3 charters for sale from Stewart-Haas Racing, now is the time to strike and go full-time. Side note, whether they buy or lease this 3rd charter, it has to come from Stewart-Haas, right? I mean, I guess they share a campus with Rick Ware. Maybe Rick Ware leases one of their 2 charters. Kaulig is likely holding on to their charters. Sounds like JTG isn't going anywhere. So let's assume this charter is coming from Stewart-Haas. That would likely mean that 2311 Racing is SOL. Stewart-Haas put 3 charters on the market. Gene Haas is holding on to 1 for Cole Custer. Front Row bought 1. Trackhouse, we now know, bought 1. There's 1 left. If that goes to RFK, what's 2311 to do? It makes me think about how the Riley Herbst to 2311 rumors have been floating for weeks, if not months. But you may remember that recently, Herbst cast doubt on his NASCAR future while on the Speed Street podcast. I'll read you this quote. "I was really sad about the news of SHR because I thought I found a forever home there. Once that news came out, we had to go shopping again, looking around. That was stressful. Still is stressful. It's nowhere near complete. The silly season in NASCAR is times 10 this year for some reason. I don't really know why. I think there's going to be more moving pieces shortly, and hopefully we get on the good side of that. If not, there are plenty of good options in the Xfinity and Truck Series." So that quote, combined with the moving pieces of RFK acquiring a 3rd charter, suggests that maybe Riley Herbst to Cup is going to need to wait at least another year. It means 2311 may have missed the boat, unfortunately, and may not expand to 3 teams, at least not yet. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe RFK is leasing a charter from Rick Ware or somewhere else, but odds are this charter is coming from Stewart-Haas, and if that's the case, I'm not sure what 2311 is going to do, at least in the short term. Anyway, that was just a side note, something to keep an eye on, speculation on my part. Again, focusing on the RFK angle, this is extremely exciting. Once a 5-car powerhouse in the mid-2000s dwindled to 2 middling teams. Now over the past few years, they're on the up and up once again, now actually expanding once again. Very exciting. As a longtime Roush fan, it's awesome to see what Brad Keselowski and the next gen car have done for this team in the modern age. And shoot, landing Kroger, if they even give them half the support they've been giving JTG Doherty over the years, that's huge. So that's the RFK angle. Now let's talk about Ryan Preece. Is Ryan Preece the right fit? Hey, this is why people say to build bridges, not walls. Ryan Preece represented Kroger for several years during his time at JTG Doherty Racing. I remember seeing Ryan Preece's face in my local grocery store on the gas pumps. Preece and Kroger clearly had a strong relationship then. I think that's what's pushing this deal forward now. A lot of folks are down on Ryan Preece, and I get it. If you look at the box score, his recent numbers are not impressive, but we need to add some context. Let's compare Ryan Preece, the current driver of the number 41 Stewart-Haas Ford, to Cole Custer, the most recent driver of the number 41 Stewart-Haas Ford. Cole Custer, who is now an Xfinity Series champion, had an average finish of 20.4 during his 3 Cup seasons in the 41. You have to remember, Custer was there during Harvick's 9-win 2020. Every year Custer was in the 41, Stewart-Haas got at least 2 cars in the playoffs. Compare that to Ryan Preece, who over the last almost 2 years has an average finish of 21.1, slightly worse than Custer. But again, adding context, Stewart-Haas has a grand total of 1 victory during the nearly 2 years Preece has been there, and it was last week, Chase Briscoe at Darlington. They've gotten exactly 1 car in the playoffs each of the last 2 seasons. So let's be honest about things. Ryan Preece boarded a sinking ship. Tony Stewart abandoned ship. Ford, it sounds like, has abandoned ship. I'm sure many crew members and employees have abandoned ship over the course of this season. Ryan Preece was initially excluded from the driver study session early this season. He's been paired with Chad Johnston, who was let go mid-season by Chip Ganassi in 2020. Context matters. The results have been mid. But let's acknowledge that Ryan Preece is not exactly in a great situation right now. Let's also acknowledge that Chris Buescher, who once upon a time was Ryan Preece's teammate at JTG Doherty, has found the juice at RFK. We all thought Chris Buescher was at least decent. He did win an Xfinity Series championship in 2015, but it wasn't until he got to RFK in Cup and won 4 races over the last 2+ years that we realized, hey, this guy's a legit contender. He made the round of 8 last season and unfortunately was the first driver out of the playoffs on points this year. Point is, Chris Buescher has emerged and we all now regard him as, hey, pretty darn good. Perhaps Ryan Preece can be the next guy to go from JTG Doherty to Roush, find his footing, evolve into a regular playoff contender. I think it's possible. Ryan Preece is a veteran racer at this point. He'll be 34 at the start of next season. He should be smack dab in the middle of his prime. I think he has the ability to do very well at RFK Racing next season. Let me know if you agree or disagree down in the comments below. Assuming this report is true, that means every current Stewart-Haas Racing Cup Series driver will have a new home for next season. Arguably, they'll all be getting upgrades. Josh Berry to the Wood Brothers, that's a Penske alliance. Chase Briscoe to Joe Gibbs, that's an upgrade. Noah Gragson to Front Row, they're sort of filling Stewart-Haas's shoes now, and now we got Preece to RFK. I don't know. You could argue all 4 drivers have ended up in better situations than they began this season. Give me your reaction down in the comment section below. I told you earlier this episode is sponsored by Toxic Waste Candy Company. Building upon the success of its predecessor, the Slime Licker 2.0 promises an enhanced experience, taking candy enthusiasts on a journey of confectionery delight like never before. The new design eliminates the roller ball, but still delivers that same delicious flavor. Oh my gosh, it did not take long to dye my tongue blue. Slime Licker is one of the internet's favorite candies. It's garnered over 365 million views on TikTok. Fans have been eagerly awaiting the return of the Slime Licker. They are back on store shelves. Thank you to Toxic Waste for sponsoring the show. Oh wow, my tongue is really blue. Now let's bring on Greg Mathern, Win the Race. Let's talk analytics, data, crunch the numbers ahead of this weekend's playoff opener at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Atlanta, the playoff opener this weekend. Greg Mathern from wintherace.info is joining us right here, right now. Greg, I've got some big questions for you. We just had a super speedway race a couple weeks ago at Daytona, but Atlanta is kind of unique. Sure, it races a lot like a pack race nowadays, but it's not quite the same thing. We've seen some drivers like William Byron win here twice already in the new configuration. What makes Atlanta unique, and are there any drivers that immediately jump out at you as potential favorites?
It races more for lack of a better term, it's racier, right? It has a little more control over the cars, a little more for the guys to do. We also see probably a little bit less variability. If we look at average running position at the tracks, if we look at the five Gen 7 races at Atlanta, the best average running position is 10.14. When we look at Daytona and Talladega, it jumps up to 12.61. So there's definitely a little bit more variability at those other tracks. Atlanta, you can hold your position a little bit better.
Hmm.
Again, that we see that same thing kind of reflected in the top 10 laps. At Atlanta, the highest top 10% rate is 68%. We go to Daytona and Talladega, drops down to 49%. And
Interesting.
in fact, six drivers at Atlanta have over half of their laps in the top 10. So it's definitely a track that you can be more consistent at. You can get up front and hold your position a little bit better. You don't get quite the aggressive runs that you get at some of the other tracks.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me that you can hold your position better at Atlanta. Qualifying potentially going to matter a little more on Saturday than perhaps at Daytona and Talladega. Even I want to talk about Ford though because they dominated Daytona. Joey Logano won a stage, led 34 laps. Michael McDowell led 26. Justin Haley in a Ford led 21 laps. And even if you go back to Atlanta in February, remember Todd Gilliland, I believe, led the most laps in that race with 58. Austin Cindric won a stage as well. So Ford has to be the favorites this weekend, right? Or are you not as confident in that manufacturer as I may be?
No, I think Ford is justifiably the favorite, and I think it makes sense in that sense. Again, we have some differences in between the tracks.
Sure.
Again, if we're going to jump back to the average running position, if we look at Daytona and Talladega over the Gen 7, Kyle Busch is the leader at those tracks in the Gen 7 at 12.61. He drops down to 20th at Atlanta at 18.42. Now, obviously, it's a pretty small sample size. We got five races at Atlanta versus 11 at Daytona and Talladega. So I've got a little more confidence in the Daytona Talladega numbers than the Atlanta numbers. But we do see a little bit of difference. That said, we have constants there. We have, people who pop up on both. If we look at the drivers who have the most laps in the top 10, of the top 10 drivers in the top 10, eight of those names appear in the list for Daytona and Talladega and the list for Atlanta.
Hmm.
We look at the Fords who pop up in that list: Blaney, Cindric, Logano, and Keselowski, all top 10 in laps in the top 10 at Daytona and Talladega, all top 10 in the top 10 laps at Atlanta. So I think there's definitely some strong correlation between the tracks. We definitely see some of those similarities there. And again, as you pointed out, we saw it earlier this year, right? We saw the Fords be very strong at Daytona. We saw them turn around and be very strong at Atlanta. So I think we're going to be looking at those same cars. Again, the Fords were strong at Daytona again 2 weeks ago. So we definitely see that opportunity for them to have a strong race and be up front for a lot of the time.
Yeah, and Ford technically has more playoff cars this year than Chevy or Toyota. I mean, it's 6 versus 5, I believe. But, well, now, Greg, I want to focus in on a few. Is it too early to call them bubble drivers now? We look at this first round, 4 get eliminated. I think there's a few drivers that have to have Atlanta circled as, I don't want to say a must win, but must perform. Get stage points, run top 10, finish top 5. First name I think of is obviously Harrison Burton. He won at Daytona to make the playoffs, but this season he has a 25.7 average finish. So I don't think he's going to run very well the other two races. What did the numbers say about Harrison Burton's odds at Atlanta?
Well, I think you're right that, for most of the quote bubble drivers, it's probably not must win, it's must perform. Harrison Burton's the exception, right? Harrison Burton probably must win here. Just as you said, his average finish position is just not great when you look at where he was at the points when he snagged that win. 2 years ago, he wouldn't have made the playoffs because he was below 30. So
Yeah.
this has got to be a very, very strong race for him. He's had a mixed bag at Atlanta, though. So he's got to hope that he has one of those good races. He was really good in the spring. He had an average running position of 12.7. He was really strong in the second race back in 2022, where he had an average running position of 13.95. That said, the other three races, he's had an average running position of over 25. If we look at Atlanta only, no driver who has run all five races at Atlanta has a lower average running position at Atlanta than Harrison Burton. His average running position across all five races is 22.48. So he's not had a consistently strong performance here. And when his performance has been bad, it's unfortunately for him been quite bad. I think he's got to have this circled as, hey, this is the one that I got to show up at, and I got to have one of my good races for sure.
Goodness gracious. Yeah. Hopefully he finds himself another drafting partner like he did Parker Retzlaff at Daytona. Like that may be what it takes. Daniel Suarez is another driver. He's a good road racer, could do some damage at Watkins Glen for sure, but he won at Atlanta in February. Gotta imagine he has this race circled. What do you think?
He probably does because he won here in Atlanta, but he also has a finish of second, sixth, and fourth in some of the other races.
Wow.
The one race that he finished outside of the top 10 was when he finished 29th and he wrecked. So he's been really strong here when he has had the performance. And he's one of those drivers where we do see a difference between the normal drafting tracks and Atlanta. When we look at the normal drafting tracks, he's kind of right in the middle in his running position. Here, he is way up front in the list of guys. So he absolutely has to think, maybe I don't have to win it, but I've been really strong here. I better have a very strong performance because this has been, perhaps his best track on, across all of the races in the Gen 7 car.
That's remarkable that he has four top six finishes in 5 Atlanta starts in this era. That's pretty ridiculous. What about Austin Cindric? I mentioned him earlier. He was fantastic here in the spring race. In fact, more than half of his laps led this year have come at drafting tracks. What do you think of Austin Cindric this weekend?
Well, I mentioned him before. He's one of those 4 drivers that appears in the top 10 of top 10 laps run at both the drafting at Talladega and Daytona and here at Atlanta. He's really good here. He has the 5th best average running position of anyone in the Cup Series at this new track. He's led laps in 4 of the 5 races. And in that 5th race, he managed to get himself up to 2nd. So he has been up front consistently. This is, again, one of those tracks where he knows he performs. He's going to be similar to Daniel Suarez in that aspect of like, hey, I show up here. I perform well here. I better do well here because this is going to set the tone for my playoffs.
Yeah, with those great expectations, though, comes pressure. One final driver I want to mention is Brad Keselowski. I'm worried about Brad in these first 2 rounds because he doesn't have a single top 10 on a road course in his last 13 starts. You got Watkins Glen, then the Roval. Places like Atlanta are where Keselowski is going to need to do some damage. What do you make of Brad Keselowski this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, he is one of those guys who has struggled at some of the races that we're going to have coming up. Of course, when we think of drafters, Brad Keselowski probably comes to mind as the premier, or if he's not your one, he's 1A of this generation, right? He's consistently been very, very good at these drafting tracks. And he's shown some really good promise here. The first year of the Gen 7 car, when he had just moved to RFK, they were kind of finding their feet, right? They didn't necessarily have anything. So, maybe not the greatest year. But if we take out those 2 races from 2022, he has the best average running position at this track over the last 3 races. His average running position over the last 3 races, 975.
Wow.
He has led laps in a significant number of laps, not just a few laps. He's led significant numbers of laps here. He is really showing up at this track. He's got a couple of top 10 finishes. Certainly, again, when you look at his overall drafting performance and his performance here, you got to think that Brad Keselowski has this race as hey, this is another one of those races that I can really show up at, and I've been consistent at as of late.
Yeah, he's always in the mix, but it's still shocking to me that Keselowski does not have a win on a drafting track in the next gen era, unless you count that dual win from like 2022, I guess. So maybe that one counts, I suppose. But thank you so much, Greg, for your time this week. Good numbers ahead of Atlanta Motor Speedway. You can find more of Greg's work at wintherace.info. He's also wearing the shirt. He does stuff for dailydownforce.com as well. That's right, show it off. Greg, thanks for being on. We'll talk to you again later these playoffs, man. Have a good one.
Absolutely. Thanks.